Recently, one sunny afternoon, we went downtown for some public opinions. We present them to you as POPVOX. First, we asked for some opinions about alternatives to our current New Zealand flag. The alternatives were A. Hundertwasser's coral design, B. the silver fern flag, C. Kyle Lockwood's interpretation of our current flag, and D. the Tino Rangatiratanga flag by Hira Ina Marsden, Jan Smith and Linda Munn.
Well, the green spiral, I love that.
I'm happy with the one we've got, but if I had to choose, I like the silver fern on the black flag.
I love the top one because I love the green and the coral form.
No, I think that something a bit more Kiwi would be, I prefer it, so I like these top two maybe.
I've always had a preference for B. I think the current New Zealand flag is a bit outdated and a wee bit too colonial looking. I think black is distinct. It's pretty much unique, I think, among the world's flags. I don't think there's very many black flags. Anything unique would be good.
I like them all. I've always liked the Hundertwasser one. But that said, I think these are more authentically New Zealand, probably a bit more reflective of New Zealand Indigenous culture as well.
Let me go with that one. I kind of like the composition of it actually.
No, I'd like to see a distinctive New Zealand flag which shows some characteristics of New Zealand, and so I think the fern and the type of spiral are quite good ideas.
I prefer that one there. Is it Hundertwasser? Yes, well I like him. I've got some books of his and little pictures of his at home. Yes, and I like that one.
I don't really think the one that we've got actually reflects our multicultural identity and what will become more and more so as we continue. In terms of those flags and how they reflect that, number C is probably the one that actually tries to blend them, but I don't actually feel as if it's quite there yet.
Yeah. I'm reasonably happy with what we've got now. It would be nice to see something like a silver fern or something on what we've got now though.
I think I like number B, the more traditional one.
Well, this one here is sort of very, you would relate that to our sports teams whenever you saw that, and I certainly hope New Zealand is a hell of a lot more than just its sports teams. So, it's appropriate for what it's used for and it's great. This one here just seems to be an interpretation of that and it just doesn't work for me. I think that has significance culturally and for the country, and I think this has great significance, and I think it's a really cool looking flag.
Wellington City Council are planning to charge residents for water through water metering. We see this unnecessary corporatisation as being one step away from privatisation. Should we be charged for water?
I believe so. Well, basically, at the moment, it's a free good that everyone uses to access, and then having to put some value on it will mean that consumption will be thought about a bit more.
I think it's dependent on how it's going to be measured, obviously.
I can't see why we need them considering our rainfall. End of story.
I think in principle it's a good idea. Otherwise there's a shared resource that people can use without any feeling they need to constrain their consumption of it.
For most of New Zealand, yes. I mean, in Wellington we quite often have, at the moment, a huge excess of water, so whether or not your favourite's a bit irrelevant, but in places where there's water shortages I think that would be a good thing, yes.
I was thinking about that the other day because I signed a petition to actually say no, we shouldn't pay for water meters, and that was my instinctual reaction. But then I thought, hang on, if the whole planet is grappling with the idea that water has to be recycled and is a resource that we have to honour and respect, perhaps metering water is a way that we can consciously be aware of how much we use and what we're paying for, and who can say that they own the water.
I'd be very disappointed about having to pay for water. It just seems unnecessary to me, and people should just use water economically, and the council should remind them from time to time. And also the comparisons that the council did with Auckland were all astray, as was shown by an engineer in Wellington.
I think water should be free. It falls out of the sky and no one owns it.
Minister of Education Anne Tolley has recently announced drastic cuts of 80% to community education, whilst giving $35 million to private schools. We asked the public how they felt.
I don't think they're really related. I mean, you need to give money to private schools, because if you don't have the private schools, then the state has to provide more state schools, so it's really a trade-off there. Taking money away from community education, in my view, is rather silly, yes. Counterproductive, yeah.
It needs to be looked at very closely what the evening institutes have lost, because some of those courses were probably quite valuable, particularly to people who were unemployed. At the same time, I think possibly the private schools might have needed some more money. I don't actually know.
I think there's an agenda there that is not being openly communicated. And in a sense, I think it's going against a huge groundswell to open up education for all. I was at a workshop yesterday where we were talking about open education resources and being able to free up content that then people can actually learn from freely. What would be interesting is to actually have somebody ask the minister why that decision, that giving on the one hand and taking away on the other, has been made. What agenda has forced that decision?
Cuts to education. I didn't know there was anything left to cut. Let's look at the other side of the argument and say, parliamentary expenses. If we're going to save some money, let's cut some funding out of it.
It's basically more privatisation from the National Party, really, isn't it? Which I'm thoroughly against. I think it should be the reverse order. I think there should be more money for public schools. A lot more.
I'm firmly behind adult education. Education, even if it is a hobby class, is never a waste. You're always bettering yourself. And in a recession, I can see that they need to make cutbacks. You know, that's fine. But at the expense of educating your public and making them better, maybe more creative, maybe more vocal, seems to be a really good thing. Maybe they're scared of us getting educated. Well, I did French, that's why I was marching, because I did it a couple of years ago, and it was totally because I wanted to learn a different language, and it was fantastic, and I know it was subsidised, but any education is never a waste.
Chief Justice Dame Sian Elias suggested that there should be less prisons and more money spent on rehabilitation. Minister of Justice Simon Power disagreed, suggesting more prisons be built. We think this is outrageous, considering that New Zealand has the second highest rate of imprisonment in the developed world. We asked the public for their views.
I think there's quite great efforts put into rehabilitation anyway, and sometimes it will work and sometimes it won't. But I think it's no reason to give up on it, and more effort should go into rehabilitation for sure.
Well, she may well be right, and the fact that we've got so many imprisoned suggests that the system as it is currently isn't working. But I think it's more about the deterrent effect. So if we had better enforcement, I suspect we wouldn't need as many prisons, because people would be deterred from crime.
Well, personally I think a lot of prisoners are in there for the wrong reasons. They should have the real criminals in there, not just the petty criminals, you know?
I'm a firm believer, that education as opposed to locking people away and forgetting them. So yeah, rehabilitation, don't hide them away, give them counselling, give them help, give them education. Yeah, more prisons seems like another band-aid solution.
Locking up anything, whether it's an emotion or whether it's a person, doesn't actually treat the fundamental cause of where the emotions come from or where the behaviours come from.
I think we should have less prisons and more rehabilitation.
I don't support more prisons. I think New Zealand in prisons, I think we've got the second highest per capita population in prisons in the world, next to the States, I believe. I think much more effort needs to go into rehabilitation, particularly teaching prisoners how to read.
The idea of building more prisons is fairly negative. I guess it needs a lot more research done on it as to what's going to be more beneficial.
God, look, I've been in rehabs and stuff. I've met a lot of guys who managed just to avoid prison and they got put in psych wards instead. The doctors sorted them out they come back into society as really cool people, you know, successful people. So I don't know if prisons are working, I mean, I've been told you go there and it's like going to another school. Everyone gets together and says, then they're going to rip everyone off, and how you rip people off.
And I would completely agree. I used to work for the Department of Corrections as a policy manager, and I think rehabilitation is the way to go, and more prisons is an utter and absolute and complete waste of time.